Great.
So at the very beginning, let's start there. Where and when were you born?
I was born in 1997. I'm 24 years old. I was born in Russia, outside St. Petersburg, this little tiny village that nobody has ever heard of. But I came here when I was 9 months old, so
Oh,
I don't really know anything about Russia.
ah, but are you bilingual? So you spoke Russian at home?
Yes, I spoke Russian at home. I also spoke English. I spoke Spanish. I learned Latin along the way. So, yeah, four languages.
Wow, that's great. What month were you born? I'm interested in your astrological sign.
I was born on March 8th, which is International Women's Day. It's very appropriate for me. I'm a
Right.
Pisces.
So is that Pisces?
Yeah.
And do you feel like a sensitive, sometimes indecisive, intuitive kind of person or not?
It's interesting. I've been giving astrological signs a lot of thought lately, and before I used to never believe in them because I've always been introduced to things like science, and I've always been surrounded and immersed in science. So that's what I'm always going by. But lately, I've been questioning that a lot. Because I think that there must be some validity to astrology, right? It's something that's been around for generations, for centuries. So I don't want to dismiss it so easily. I'm definitely not indecisive. That's what I'm going to say. But I am intuitive, so I don't know if that means that, I don't know, I have parts of me that are my rising whatever. I've heard that, but I don't know what my rising is, so I can't speak quite intelligently on this.
There's a free site called Astrolabe, Astrolabe, and they'll do a printout of like 20 pages of your natal chart. And it's not like having an astrologer do it, but that'll tell you the basics. That's for sure.
Yeah, I heard for those things you have to know what time you were born. When I asked my mom, like, I don't know, maybe she was traumatized by the birthing experience because it was a really difficult process. It was long labor. I know that I was born sometime in the middle of the night, like between 12 and 2, maybe 12 and 3, but I don't think I ever got a specific time from my mom. I have to work on that.
Mm-hmm. A good astrologer can figure out by major events in your life which is more accurate. Um, why did your parents leave their small village?
um, I guess turmoil, right? Anyone who flees Russia is usually fleeing from turmoil. Well, anyone who flees from any country like Russia is fleeing from turmoil usually. My dad is Iranian and my mom is Russian, so it's interesting. My dad's family was born in Iran, but they all moved to Russia. So that's where my parents met. And my dad makes this joke about how since I was born on International Women's Day, if we had stayed in Russia, then all I would receive on my birthday are flowers, and I wouldn't be happy about that. So that's the reason that he claims that we came to New York. Uh, I'm not clearly that's not the real reason, but my parents and I we don't have substantial discussions like that where we reveal our feelings and reveal the reasons that we do things, I guess. So I hesitate to ask them, and I probably will in the future because I'm curious about why they left. Genuinely curious about why they left. But right now, we're not in the state where we have those have anything besides superficial, surface level discussions.
Hmm. Do you have siblings?
I do, yeah. A younger brother. He is 20 years old. He was born here, so he's 100% American. He can be president if he wants to. I cannot be, unfortunately, but he doesn't want to be president, so it doesn't even matter.
Okay. A lot of times, firstborn girls are achievers. I did a book on climate, young women activists globally, and a lot of them, I think like two-thirds were firstborn. So it's not statistically probable. So I think firstborns do get encouragement to lead and achieve and move forward. Does that fit for your experience?
I think so, yes. My parents were not quite strict with me, but I always wanted to achieve at school. I always wanted to achieve in extracurricular activities. So that was something that I was always just driven to do. My parents supported me in doing that. I remember coming home from school all the time and jumping right into my homework, and I wouldn't do anything until I was finished with it. My brother is not that way at all. I don't want to say, well, I don't really know why he's like that, but he definitely got treated differently than I did growing up. My parents were a lot stricter with me with things like coming home late or
Oh yeah.
dating, for example. My brother doesn't have any of that inhibiting him. He gets to do whatever he wants.
Right. I'm finishing up a book about masculinity and men's views about masculinity, and that theme of treating boys differently than girls, socializing them different, is really interesting. And what comes up over and over in those discussions with men is boys are taught not to be vulnerable, not to show their weaknesses or their deep feelings. And then the amazing thing is then we expect them to be in relationships in their adulthood and have these communicative, deep exchanges when we've kind of drummed it out of them. Do you see that in your brother?
Absolutely, I do. We started having more heartfelt discussions in the last year or two. I think that he's matured more since he's 20 years old now. He still has a little bit to go. I have this dream of going out to dinner with him and being able to talk about our parents or just like talk about my life, my dating life, these very personal things that I can't really share with other people in my family. My brother, I feel like I can share that with him, but he has a little bit of learning to do. So sometimes I view that as my role, like I'm his teacher, but that's kind of a weird dynamic because I really want to be his friend more so than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I do. I definitely see that. He has a girlfriend. His girlfriend's lovely. She usually teaches him, and she's younger than him, so it's quite interesting. I see that a lot in my brother. But I think that he's making a huge effort to learn, to be receptive to my feelings and to the feelings of people around him and what they're telling him. He's interesting, to say the least.
Good.
But
Is he in college?
He actually is going to trade school in January for electrical engineering. I'm excited for him. He's very, very excited. He decided that sitting in a classroom was not for him. He didn't like it at all. So he would rather do more hands-on things.
You know, that's part of a piece that explains why currently women are 60% of the college students in the U.S. And so that seems to be a part of it. Economically, boys think, I don't want to sit at a desk like your brother, and I can make a lot of money doing something else, so why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't really know why so many women are going into college at higher rates, or completing college at higher rates, but I like hearing that. And for selfish reasons, I like hearing that. There's this wave on TikTok where women and girls are trying to explain why they use words like as opposed to men and boys who do not use words like. And they're really they're showing that they're trying to assert themselves in conversations and indicate that they're not done speaking. It's like a development that comes after generations of women and girls just being interrupted by men continuously. So it's like a coping mechanism. Huh. And I admit that I've tried to cut out my likes before in the past. I've tried to speak more assertively.
Directly.
And I've succeeded. Yes, I've succeeded. I have eliminated the likes out of my everyday speech for the most part, but there are times when I still rely on them, and I don't really think that the fact that I use likes in my speech, it doesn't indicate that I'm not an intellectual human being, because the ideas that are coming out of my mouth, I think, are smart and strong and well-formed, and just because I'm incorporating a like or two in there, it doesn't mean that it doesn't negate any of that. So I don't know, if someone is choosing to focus on one word like as opposed to a whole string of words or a whole sentence even, then what does that really say about them, right?
But if someone said to me, I'm like totally in love with some movie star, that does sound Valley Girl and teen. I'm like totally this and like totally. Is that the kind of like use you mean?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't negate what the person is saying. That doesn't mean that the person's feelings or ideas aren't valid. Usually they are.
Right. What did you learn from your family growing up about what it was to be a good woman? I'm thinking in Iran, people are traditionally Islamic. In Russia, they're traditionally Russian Orthodox Church. Were there those kind of influences, or what was the message?
Sort of. My mom, I think she's a feminist, but I don't think that she would call herself a feminist. She came here when she was 25. She learned the English language at around that time, too. So she knows the definition of the word feminist because I talk about it, but it's not something that she would have encountered naturally while learning the English language. So I guess in my head, when I talk about feminism, I can see that she understands what I'm fighting for, but I don't think she feels it the same way that I do because of her upbringing and her background. So she is a feminist in the sense that she believes wholeheartedly in her agency, in her ability, in her right to live fully and belong as a woman. So I have been influenced by her in that regard to think about womanhood that way, but I've also been influenced by a number of other things, like books in particular. I've learned so much from books, fiction with strong female characters written by women. I've just been reading books all my life, and parts of those characters have sort of meshed with my own personality, like Hermione Granger with her intelligence, Jane Eyre with her defiance, Madame Defarge with her ruthlessness and anger. All of these characters are just a part of me today. So I've learned from my mom, I've learned from my schooling, I've learned from books, I've learned from my friends. I'm still learning.
Right, of course, it's lifelong. And what about your dad having supposedly Islamic Muslim beliefs?
Well, actually, my family's kind of complex. So my mom is half Muslim, half Christian, and my dad is Jewish. So there we go. But in the Jewish religion, there's still elements of patriarchy and sexism that resonate. So those are parts that I fight against, and those are parts that I lose at when it comes to my family, which is part of the reason why we don't have super substantial conversations, because I'm not trying to argue with them for extended periods of time.
Are they observant, your dad? I mean, does he go to synagogue? Is he part of a shul?
Only when it counts, I guess. Like only
High
when
holidays.
Yeah, on holidays, when my grandparents were alive, if they were celebrating, for example, we would celebrate as children. But now, no, we wish each other. Well, they wish me like a happy Hanukkah or something, but that's it. That's the extent of it.
No Sabbath observance on Friday or that kind of thing.
No, I remember this one time I was a child, maybe like 10 or 11, and suddenly we celebrated the Sabbath. We observed the Sabbath, and I was so confused because I've never done that before in my life. So, no, it's a rarity. I'm not even sure why we did it that day.
Interesting. What about school? I interviewed a young woman in New York named Andy, and she said when she's maybe a year younger than you, and she said growing up, it was clear that the teachers didn't like the boys, the students. They thought of them as troublemakers, and her friends said, "I hate boys," unless they were going out with one. I wondered what you saw in terms of attitudes from educators towards boys and girls.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about that. In college, I remember, so when I graduated from college, I participated in a forum because I was a triple major, English, political science, journalism. And this was a forum of...
That was in 2019, right?
2019, May 2019. And it was this forum where all of the professors of the political science department invited some alums and students to participate in their experiences, share their experiences about what it meant to be a political science student at Brewing College, which is part of the City University of New York. So I remember talking to them about how in every single political science class that I've taken at Brewing College, and that was, I think, around 30 or maybe 35 credits, something like that. It was a typical major. In every single political science class that I've taken there, most, maybe like 95% of the readings that we were assigned for homework or the readings that we analyzed in class, they were written by men. So I made that point, and I was asking them to consider why we aren't reading political scientists who are women. And I think most of the professors were receptive to that comment, but then I also felt that some professors were not receptive, and they said something to the lines of, well, that's the canon and that's what we have to work with. And I kind of find that hard to believe. Like, are there really no political scientists who are women who've made a dent, who've made an impact, who have something worthwhile to say? I find it very, very hard to believe. So there are things like that in the course of my education that I still feel like I'm defending as a woman who's trying to get the most out of her education. So my political science education is formed largely by the opinions and thoughts of men, and I'm trying to change that on my own right now. And I'm not going to school for that. I go to school for women's and gender studies as a master's student now, so it's just up to me, I feel, to change it in myself.
What about in secondary school? What was did you didn't have that sense that teachers favored one gender over the other?
I remember my teachers telling me that boys behave differently than girls, for example. But yeah, they had the opinion that boys were less mature, for example, and I also had that opinion because that's just something that I either observed growing up because boys were over here making fart noises or making jokes about sex, and I'm just here with my head buried down in my notebook, and I'm doing well. I was a straight A student. I always was a straight A student, so that's where my concentration was. But meanwhile, you have this boy who's like in the 8th grade just doing some shenanigans next to me and distracting me from my work. So I can see where the teachers got that perception. In private conversations, especially with my female teachers, I remember them saying something to me like, "You're doing really well. I hope the boys are not distracting you. These boys are very immature, but don't tell them that I said that." Things like that.
Yeah. Well, developmentally they are, like people say, like a couple of years behind. So they do develop more slowly.
That's true, but nobody ever really says to boys that they should look up to girls as role models for that, right? We always say that we always give boys the excuse that they mature slower, so we have to make exceptions for them.
Good point. Good point. When did you start thinking I'm a feminist and use that word?
Pretty early on. I remember, I don't really know when feminism was popular, but I feel like when I was in the beginning stages of my high school career, 14 years old, it wasn't a popular word to use. I remember getting glances and glares if I called myself a feminist. But I remember doing it because it resonated.
Meant man hater to a lot of people.
It still means man hater to a lot of people, and I find myself defending the word feminism even to my dad. So yeah, but as long as I can remember, I guess. I'm not even sure in middle school if I did, but I feel like I definitely acted like a feminist, even if I didn't call myself a feminist. But I think the earliest memory I have is when I'm 14 or 15 years old, and I'm just editing a literary magazine for school, for high school, and the word feminism pops up in a poem or in a short story or something, some kind of submission that we got, and I felt it. It resonated with me. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a more concrete example for you, but that's the time that I just remember from before.
Right. And then why did you decide to get a master's in women's and gender studies?
I love learning, and once I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I took a gap year, I guess you would call it. Well, I didn't intend to get a master's at all. I just intended to finish my schooling because I was going to journalism, and the option for journalists to get a master's was J school, and I'm not interested in that because I had plenty of experience under my belt in my undergraduate career with internships at major news outlets and also with freelance gigs with the school newspaper. I was a top journalism student, so I didn't feel like I needed a master's degree to reiterate the experience that I've already gotten exposure to. But then I started thinking about being in the classroom again. I missed interacting with classmates. I missed bopping ideas off of each other. I really missed feeling that expansion whenever you get taught this new concept or get introduced to this new part of the world that you've never really thought about before. And I made an effort to go after that feeling, and I ended up applying to CUNY. And I'm a public school product. Like I've been in public school all my life in New York City, so I wouldn't really go anywhere else but CUNY because CUNY's mission really resonates with me. So that's what I did. I looked at the programs that CUNY was offering, and I thought very critically about which ones I would go to. I considered comparative literature, but it didn't feel right. I considered political science, but again, didn't feel right. But then I saw women's and gender studies all the way at the bottom of the list because it's the very last program that's listed alphabetically. And it hit me that that's what I'm covering in my line of work. That's how I identify as a human being with feminism. So maybe I should explore that part of me more.
And how many women's studies were you able courses to take as an undergrad?
One.
Like an intro?
Yes, and it wasn't even labeled a women's studies course. It was labeled something else. It was labeled
gender studies?
No, it had no it had no indication that it would be about gender or anything, but the content that we read was about gender and about these ideas of what it means to be a woman and feminism and these movements. So, but it wasn't called, I don't remember what it was called. It was masquerading as another course, but it was definitely a gender studies course.
Interesting. Are there any courses in the gender studies program that are focused on masculinities?
There are general courses on what it means to be a feminist and what it means to focus on gender, for example, that incorporate masculinity.
But do they really?
To an extent, like you know how a lot of courses have like race week, for example, when you're talking about like black women, for example, in feminism, as opposed to just interspersing black women throughout the entire course. That's kind of what they do with masculinity as well. They dedicate like a week, like it's a theme or a topic, as opposed to something that's integral to the entire discussion. So they do that. But I feel like there are definitely conversations in academic circles about focusing on masculinity and offering courses specific to masculinity. There's a listserv that I'm a part of there where there's like this ongoing discussion from academics and scholarly experts who are talking about masculinity and trying to design a course to accommodate it. So it's definitely coming, is my belief.
What's the title of that listserv?
Let me look it up for you. So, masculinity. Men's studies. So this is part of WMSTL.
Oh yeah, I'm on that one, the women's studies list.
Yes. I think it's from NYU, is it? No.
No, I think it's from Maryland.
Yes, UMD. You're right.
That's the one you're talking about. Yeah, some of the discussion is probably for me asking people for if they know of any men's studies classes.
It probably is. Michael J. Murphy was the most recent one that I have.
Okay, I'll look. So what are you going to focus on in your, do you do a thesis or a comprehensive exam, or what do you do?
Yes, we do a thesis at the end of the program, I guess. I'm a bad student in the sense that I have not formed my topic on it yet. I'm in progress with it, but I really want to focus on media representation because that's what I focus on as a master's student. That's what I think a lot about. Gendered language is a big issue in the media. The way that news outlets regard women, people who identify as LGBT, it's a mess. And there's a lot of change to be done. And journalism in general is heading toward the state of progression where it evolves and it tries to be more inclusive, but there are still so many holes to fill that I feel like are not talked about as often as, say, things like, I don't know, like race coverage or how to think about journalism ethically. Like those discussions they're not focusing on race. I mean, they're not focusing on gender, they're not focusing on sexuality, and they should be, and that's a big hole. So that's what I'm hoping to focus on in my master's thesis somehow. More specifics to be determined.
I have an idea for you. You know about the Gina Davis Center, the research center, right?
Yeah.
A group called Promundo, Promundo, is working with the Gina Davis Center to get the word out about the need for boys and men to work for gender equality.
Yeah.
And they've done something like 3 survey studies with them. So I think there's probably lots of interesting data there, and I can get you in touch with the co-founder of Promundo. He's in DC right now.
That's great because men should absolutely be involved in these discussions, and it's kind of seldom that they are, right? In my circles, at least, men do identify as feminists, which is really, I like that. But in a lot of circles, I don't think they do. There's a lot of power in men aligning themselves with feminism, right? Because they're using a feminine-sounding word to describe themselves, and in doing so, they're what? Like challenging what it means to be a man, stretching the definition of masculinity. Those are important.
What percent of your fellow sister students are male, female, non-binary, questioning, whatever their orientation is?
I think a good 90% of the Women's and Gender Studies program at CUNY is women, cis women. And I think the rest of the 10%, by my estimations at least, I didn't conduct any formal analysis or anything, but by my estimations, about the rest of them 10%, non-binary and cis men.
And what about GLBTQ identified people?
I would say from my informal conversations with them and what I know about them through class discussions and in hangouts, 60% of them, 70% of them, a majority of them identify as LGBT.
Mm-hmm.
Myself included.
And where are you on the lesbian, non-binary? What category do you put yourself in?
Really, I don't like categories. If I have to, on my Tinder, it says bisexual and queer. It says that because I have to select categories for that. But it feels weird to me to say that. And part of the reason is because I try to explain this all the time to my LGBT friends who sometimes say that I'm doing a disservice by not identifying myself. I identify myself in the moments when I feel it is important, to make a stand, to include yourself as part of the community in a very public way. I'm fine with that. But when you think about it, the words just sound weird to me, like lesbian, gay, bisexual. They just, how in English, the words that we use, the sound of them mimics their connotation? Like take the word slow. Like it's the long O in slow, it sounds slow. So the fact that you're saying it tells you that there is something, it makes you feel that there is a slowness to it. So it mimics the connotation of the word. But lesbian, bisexual, gay, it just sounds like science-y and proby, and it just sounds really, really weird to me. So, I mean, straight is like it has a different connotation than the word lesbian and gay. And I really don't know how to explain this in a very eloquent way, but those are my feelings. Like, it just sounds scientific and like you are scrutinizing something and the words are clunky and odd. So it just sounds weird to me to say, I'm bisexual or I'm queer. But if I have to, when I have to, I do that.
So in terms of your relationships over your dating history, have you been more involved with cis men or cis women?
Both. I think it's about half and half. The dating scene, I don't know, it's kind of weird. I'm straight passing, whatever that means, straight passing in quotes. Whenever I go on dates with women, I meet them mostly online, and multiple women have told me that they would never hit on me in a bar, for example, because I don't appear to be gay or appear to be lesbian. I'm just like, what does that even mean? Like, so many lesbian women have told me that they don't peg me as a gay woman, which infuriates me. They talk about things like markers, like I don't have any markers of a gay identity or lesbian or bisexual identity. So that infuriates me. One time I went on a date, we were playing pool, and she told me that the only marker of mine that I have is that I wear rings, and you can see them here. I wear different kinds of rings, but these are just what I'm wearing right now. And she said, those are the only way that people can know that I'm gay. And I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like, I don't understand. Do you want me to wear rainbows? Do you want me to tattoo that I'm gay or that? It infuriates me that there's an appropriate way to look gay or look lesbian or bisexual. Just look not straight, right? It's weird.
Well, in the olden days, they used to say there were lipstick lesbians and butch lesbians, and you could really look and see, oh, this woman has really short hair and wears a leather jacket and rides a motorcycle, and this woman has lipstick and longer hair. It kind of made things easier in a way. You did have those markers.
Sure, but I feel like the definition of sexuality has expanded since then, right? We talk about sexuality as something that we identify as now, not as what we look like or what we appear to be. So I don't know. Whatever it means to be straight passing, apparently I'm it, and it really angers me. But that's what my life is like in terms of dating.
Right. It would be easier. You just cut your hair real short and have a butch haircut, and then you'd have the marker.
Yeah, but I don't want to do that. I like my hair. I like my earrings. I like dresses. I'm not wearing anything elaborate right now, but I wear Masculine clothing too. I alternate. I wear whatever feels good to me. I do whatever I want with my appearance, and that's all it is. It has nothing to do with who I'm attracted to. It's just it's what I want to wear.
And that's really the whole point, isn't it? That it's about fluidity and preference and choice and not about stereotypes or boxes.
Yeah, but I feel like still a lot of people resort to stereotypes and boxes, even in the LGBT community.
Interesting. Um, in your coursework, I know that for decades there's been a big emphasis on intersectionality. That gets repeated a lot. We're not just women. We have class and religion and skin color. And what other themes are you hearing being emphasized by your profs?
Nationality. Nationality is a big one that's been added in the last, well, at least in the course of my educational career. We talk about where people come from, colonial pasts, imperialist pasts, all of these histories that are intertwined with our conversations about race, about gender, about sexuality. Nationality still takes a big role in that as well. We read different materials that put nationality at the center of feminist discussions.
So for you, the fact that you have this Iranian, Russian, American influences, that would have to be considered in understanding you.
I don't know, because, like I said, I left Russia when I was 9 months old. I haven't been back. I don't know anything about Russia. If you were to plop me in the middle of it, I would be able to speak the language and find my way around, but, like, that's a testament to my parents teaching me the language, not a testament to me being immersed in the culture. I'm an American. I've never been to Iran. I don't plan on going to Iran. The Iranian and Russian parts are big parts of my cultural upbringing at home, but beyond the home, they don't really go anywhere. I don't see them anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the gender, feminist, whatever, books, texts that you've read that really had an impact on you? You mentioned some fiction has really been influential. What else?
There are so many. There's this book called Moan, and it is exactly what you think it is. It's about the female orgasm.
Oh.
Who wrote it? Well, it wasn't so much an author as a person who gathered a series of anonymous essays. So this person reached out to, I don't remember the author's name, Ellie Honig, maybe? But this person reached out to a bunch of people on, I don't know, in their network or on a list or maybe, I don't know, in a Facebook group or something. And she asked them to write about their experiences with orgasms, with their own orgasms, with women's orgasms. And it can be read as a guide to the female orgasm. There are maybe like 50 or 60 essays in this collection, and a lot of them talk about how to make them have an orgasm specifically. A lot of them talk about how they view orgasms, how they view their vagina, their relationship to their vagina, and it's a brilliant book that makes, well, one, it makes me feel a lot of things because the way that it's written is beautiful. There are things in there that I have been shy to talk about in the past, for example, that were kind of revelatory for me. That kind of inspired me to take control of my sexual activities, my sexual experiences, to own them. And I'm still learning from them. I'm still young, and I'm still learning from those experiences and building on them. But that was a very, very influential book for me. There's this book called The Myth of the Nice Girl. Don't remember her. The author, Frances, I think something. It's a bright yellow book, so you can't miss it. It's a bright yellow book. It's a beautiful, beautiful yellow. Yellow's my favorite color. And it's about how to acclimate in the workplace and how to be in a professional space without sacrificing your values, without thinking about your likability factor, for example. And it's a very easy to read how-to book, essentially. So those kinds of books are really high on my radar. I don't want to say things like The Second Sex or, I don't know, all of these books that are in the canon for feminist literature because I've only read parts of them. Nobody I know has ever read the entire thing. The book is like a brick, so I haven't read the entire thing. It's on my library, though. I've read parts of it. I'm fine with it. I like the ideas behind it, but I feel like they're part of a different wave of feminism that no longer really applies or has been adapted, I guess. So Yeah, those are foundational texts that I have in my mind somewhere, but they're not the go-to texts when I think about feminism. The go-to texts when I think about feminism are the ones that I mentioned and the ones like them.
Mm. I'm thinking in terms of Moan, that Cher Height's book, The Height Report, I think it made tremendous changes for women when she said that like 70% of women need direct clitoral stimulation to have an orgasm, and vaginal orgasm is somehow supposed to be the way women have orgasms, but most don't, which is really a political issue. Was there anything that was revelatory in Moan in terms of women's sexuality like that?
I guess, right, there are stories and essays in there about submission. And submission is a big thing. Sometimes I I consider myself a switch. So I go between. And I'm comfortable going between depending on the context, being dominant or being submissive. I'm comfortable being either or a combination of them, whatever, it doesn't matter. It really depends on the context, who I'm with, how I'm feeling, like all these different factors. But I've never been one to be like 100% fully submissive. So there are essays like that on submission in Moan that I find very revelatory. The fact that women do enjoy these things is very interesting to me, and I'm not sure if I don't enjoy it because I have this preconceived notion of what it means to be a feminist or what it means to be a woman today, or if I just genuinely don't enjoy it because for whatever reason, right? So it's kind of hard to separate the two. But those stories, I'm reading them, and they're fascinating to me. They're fascinating to me. There are stories of how these women want to be, tossed around, or they want to be held down so that they can't really like do anything. They can't touch themselves. They can't touch their partner. It's just really, really interesting to me. I wonder what it would be like to be in that context. And I'll try it. It inspires me to try it, but I've never done like a total submission before.
I was in a women's group, and this woman said that her husband and she do a thing where they tie her wrists to the bedposts. So it's kind of like a bondage thing. So I told my significant other about it, and we tried it, and I got the giggles. I mean, I wasn't comfortable with it, so I just giggled and giggled, and it totally turned him off. So that did not work for us. But you're right. People have their own proclivities that are their own way of being, that have integrity for them. Yeah. In the myth of the nice girl, what have you seen in your work in news media and in business organizations where you've done internships and work for them? What could you apply to Myth of the Nice Girl that you might not have noticed if you hadn't read that book?
I feel like there's a lot I could apply. And I feel like I have been. I read it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it's just one of those books that kind of lives in the back of my head, where in like a weird space where I don't actively pull it up. Like I don't know where anything is on the book. Like I can't quote anything from the book, but the ideas have stuck with me, right? That's what books do. They just kind of make you feel things, and the feelings really stick with you. So when I think of the myth of the nice girl today, I think about feelings of power and feelings of trying to appeal to that power, my own power, but also power of the people who are working with me, right? Working alongside me, and finding ways to make that power work. And one of the things in the myth of the nice girl that I remember taking away is that it's sort of on me to maneuver that power and navigate it, right? Because nobody's going to do it for me. And as much as it sucks that I'm probably the only person who is thinking about power dynamics in those situations, I do have the power to change them and shift them. And if I do have that power, then I'm going to take it. So I don't know. There are a lot of issues in media and journalism, and it's not a secret. Journalism is flawed. As much as we journalists want to believe that it's not flawed and that it's a vital part of democracy, we can do better, and there are so many ways that we can do better. But in discussions with top male leadership at my organizations, I do challenge sexist notions, for example. I do challenge notions where I feel like the coverage that we're putting out is unethical, and that creates power disparities that puts me in a position where I, a young 24-year-old reporter, am going up against, I don't know, a male editor who is twice my age, maybe 3 times my age, who makes maybe 5 or 6 times more than me. So it's a scary situation to be in, but if I don't say anything, I just feel guilty about it after. So I don't know. Most of the time, it's driven by my belief that what I have to say is important, and that there are probably other people who are thinking the same thing but don't want to speak up because of the power dynamic. So that's what I got from The Myth and the Nice Girl. That's what was emphasized in me from that book.
What can you think of a specific example where you did speak truth to power, and what happened?
Are you familiar with that Gabby Petito case?
Is that the rape on the pool table?
No, Gabby Petito is the girl, the 22-year-old or 21-year-old girl who went missing. She went on a trip with her boyfriend. She went missing.
Oh, right, from Florida, and he killed her. Yeah, right.
So I got really upset with my news organization because we published dozens of articles on Gabby Petito. We turned everything into a separate post, a separate article. Every single little detail, we just put it into a separate article, which is crazy to me because we're really like amplifying, we're kind of milking it because it was doing really well with our audience. It was getting high traffic, it was getting a lot of clicks, it was getting a lot of engagement. So we were milking it. Like we were, and I wrote a few of those articles, but then after a while I started to feel really, really uncomfortable writing them and thinking about them because we were centering this girl. And I remember talking to a source. I remember talking to one of the neighbors of Brian, her boyfriend Brian's neighbors, and they were talking about Gabby as if she was, America's sweetheart. They used those words, those exact words, like America's sweetheart or something. She's America's angel. One of those very, they loved her basically, and they characterized her in this way that made her seem that she was like representative of every single girl in the United States.
Because she's white and blue eyes and blonde. And blonde. So if she'd been a Native American woman of color,
Exactly. So I brought that point up to top leadership, and then they said that while this is valid, they're also using this opportunity to put out coverage about Native American women who are missing. But that didn't sit well with me either because I made the argument that, well, yes, we're doing that, but that's secondhand. That's an idea that's coming to us as a result of the idea of Gabby Petito. It's not one that we would have prioritized if Gabby Petito didn't exist. So that's not a really sufficient explanation for me. So I've been pushing back throughout the entirety of the Gabby Petito saga for like however long it lasted, like a month and a half. And eventually I just stopped writing articles about it. I refused assignments, and I was like, I'm not putting my name on that. Like I'm just not, I don't feel comfortable with it. I went all the way up to the editor-in-chief, and I spoke to him in a private session. Yeah, like I said, I'm a lone reporter going up against this, so sometimes I feel powerless, but I don't know, I guess I can find solace in the fact that I'm doing something, even though that doesn't really bring me great comfort.
Yeah. Sometimes young women in the workplace get patronized. They get treated like my little sweetheart or my little daughter substitute, or isn't she cute? Do you find that kind of attitude or not?
Yeah, I do, but more so I think I find that there's a condescending attitude. And I don't want to name any names, but I've had male editors come up to me and they were very condescending to me. I remember I was being harassed, like horribly, horribly harassed by internet trolls because of this article that I put out. And I don't want to give too many details because I feel like if I give too many details, it will, have repercussions for me professionally. So, for anything. So that's happened before. They've gotten better about it, but yeah.
Do you, when I was getting tenure and promotion, we read books about dress for success, and that, you should dress in a certain way so you're seen as professional and taken seriously. Do you, if someone goes to work with a low-cut blouse and yoga pants on, do you think they should have the right to do that, or do you think that that it's not wise?
No, absolutely. I think you should have the right to do that, and I'm guilty of that. I do that a lot. So we've been remote for a while, but I'm wearing a crop top right now. I'm wearing sweatpants. You can see it. It's I'm just wearing it. So this is something that I would wear to work if I were in person. shouldn't have any bearing on what kind of ideas come out of my mouth. My brain is separate from my body. Like they work in connection, but my brain has its own ideas. It's capable of manifesting its own thoughts. So what's in my brain is not reflective of what's on my body. It's the same concept as the markers, right? Like markers of professionalism, markers of straightness or gayness. It's the same thing. Those markers don't really exist. They're just manifestations of what we believe should exist, but they don't have any validity. They're not real. Like, the fact that I'm wearing this does not mean that I will do less stellar work in my professional career.
Right. That's consistent theme. That makes sense. Some people find that the concept of waves, feminist waves, first, second, third, fourth, are useful. Do you think they are? And if so, are we in a fourth wave? Are we in the fifth wave? So let's say first wave is suffrage, second wave is Betty Friedan, feminine mystique, now make legal changes. Third wave is intersectionality. Fourth wave, emphasis on media, internet activism. Do you think the way I summarized it is accurate, and where do you think we are now?
I think it's a hard conversation. I think it's a hard question to answer because the waves kind of blend into each other, right? So it's kind of hard to pinpoint a specific year, for example, when first wave feminism ended and transitioned into second wave feminism. You can't neatly separate it like that. So in my head, it's not really useful to categorize it like that. I understand why we do it, because there are some distinctions that we need to be aware of. But at the end of the day, feminism is about evolution and transition, and that's what it's doing. I mean, I find it kind of difficult because I can't think of another example, another concept that we categorize like this, right? That we view as waves like this, like sexuality, racism, capitalism, like all these structures. We don't really have waves to describe them. We recognize that they're evolutions and that they ebb and flow like every other structure out there. So why don't we do the same for feminism? I mean, granted, I do think that if we have to categorize it, we are in a different wave of feminism. I'm not sure if it's the fourth wave or if it's the fifth wave, because I think that part of the evolution of feminism today is that a lot of it is being led by really young Gen Z activists. Gen Z meaning people who were born in like 97 and after. I was born in 97, so I'm Gen Z. So I feel like my feminism may be different, for example, from a millennial's feminism who might still be inclined to, I don't know, look for marriage, look for a relationship that culminates in a marriage. I don't think I'm going to get married. I don't see a benefit for it. And I know that a lot of young Gen Z women also think like me, and maybe that's some kind of pattern that's forming. But it just seems like we might be entering a completely different wave than fourth at this point. I can't say conclusively, but that's what it feels like. It feels like a different wave.
And what would distinguish it besides not looking for traditional institutions like marriage?
Home ownership, maybe.
Not having home ownership?
Yeah, not having home ownership, the ways that we regard our work, for example. I believe that millennials are still stuck with traditional ideas of what it means to work, maybe like a 9 to 5, maybe liking their work. But I don't know, maybe that's proclivity toward capitalism, right? That maybe that's
entrepreneurial. Gen Y is really entrepreneurial, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. So I don't know, maybe that comes from an inability to unattach themselves from capitalism. But in Gen Z is very critical of capitalism, and they're just working to, make enough money to do their passions. So I think that's completely different. That all feeds into it.
I'm trying to think about the difference between Y and Z. They're both very accepting of diversity. They don't really care what color your skin is or your sexual orientation. They are very internet savvy, obviously. Y was accused of being fragile teacups, anxious, couldn't cope with stress because they had helicopter parents, but I don't hear that so much for Z. But there is increasing rates of anxiety and depression, especially for girls. So you could say anxiety is also a trend. And that's definitely a fact. And I wonder if you have observations of why. Why would especially girls be more anxious recently?
So I watch a lot of TikTok. I love TikTok.
I have dances on TikTok. I'll have to show you ballroom dances.
Oh, wow, okay. You post them yourself?
But my dance teacher posted them. Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah, I'd love to see them.
They're really fun. Like East Coast, West Coast, waltz, that kind of a thing.
I love it. Yeah, please send me. I love TikToks, and I have one for my cat. I'm trying to make him TikTok famous. Well, on TikTok, there's this trend going around, which is really, really interesting to me, where girls are posting images and videos of their bodies in which they show like a flat belly, and then they show a fuller, rounder belly on the same person, and the caption usually reads something like, "Bodies that look like this also look like this," and it's supposed to show that the same body type can have different fluctuating images to it. So if you see, for example, an image of a fit-looking person on social media, and they have, like waterboard abs or all of these muscles showing and stuff, but then you can also see if they relax their posture or something, their belly may protrude, and that's not usually shown on social media. So the TikTok trend is meant to put an end to that and kind of help you change your thinking a little bit and show you a different perspective. There are also videos where the girls who are posting these videos are posting this little, like, I'm going to model on myself, but like this area, usually it's like rounder women. And even if you have like a flat tummy, this area usually protrudes a little bit from the pubic bone. The pubic bone is flatter. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so girls on TikTok and on social media, I've seen that they are worrying about this, and they're just like, well, why am I fat in this one area? And then people are going around and explaining that that's not fat, that's where your uterus is situated, and that's what it takes, so it has to protrude that way. So it's really interesting. These are really great ways to showcase different body types and celebrate them, and the reception to these videos, it's huge because girls everywhere are resonating with them, me, myself, and I included. I'm very thankful for those because I've had questions about this exact same thing. My friends have too. So I guess that said, there's a lot of opportunity for comparison, right? We see images of quote-unquote perfect content all over social media. There are perfect bodies, perfect partners, perfect social lives, perfect everything. So it consumes us. It makes us feel inadequate, and we have tried to get there we have tried to get to this image of perfection so many times, and we've failed, quote-unquote failed. So I don't know. I think that's where the anxiety and depression come in. Social media is a big part of it. Images that we present and put out. So these challenges, they're really challenging the way that we're thinking about ourselves, at least on TikTok.
What about boys? I mean, they have pressure to be tall, not short, buff, not overweight, but they don't seem to have the same rates of anxiety and depression.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe that's because boys aren't really taught to express their feelings or be vocal about their feelings. Maybe when these surveys are going out, maybe they don't even know that they're experiencing these feelings because they can't put a label on them. So I don't have an answer to that, but you're right, it is a big issue. Masculinity in general is a big issue. It's not really dissected enough, is it?
It seems to see what you think of this. I think another reason for anxiety and depression is there are so many pressures to get into a good college, to have AP courses, to do well in your SATs, and you're going to graduate with $30,000 in debt, so you've got to have a good job to pay for your debt, and there's more students applying for the same number of colleges. It's much harder to get in. It's just a lot of pressure for college-bound young people, and for kids who aren't college-bound, they don't have the industrial making a car kind of jobs available that they had in the past to make money. So there's pressure on them. How am I going to have make money? Do you think that's a factor as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge factor. It makes all the sense in the world too, because I think it also lines up with that, with the fact that 60% of women that 60% fact with the women in college that you referenced earlier, right? It makes sense to me. It all feeds into each other. I remember growing up, I was very anxious about my schoolwork all the time. Like I said, I was a straight A student, but it took a lot of effort to do that. It wasn't just, something that happened organically. Right. I worked for it. And I remember struggling in New York City, only in New York City. This doesn't happen anywhere else in the country, at least as far as I know. We have to apply to high school. So imagine the stress of applying to college when you're a senior, but you do it when you're 12 years old in 7th grade. So it's crazy and it's barbaric. It really creates like distinctions in classes where people are like, I got into the top tier college in New York City, where I got into my zone school, which is supposedly bad and just not, and it's just seen as inadequate academically. So that pressure has always been with me personally. It's been with a lot of my friends who grew up in New York City since the time that we were, 12 years old, 11 years old, applying to high school.
What did they look at? Did you write an essay? Did they give you an IQ test? Did they look at your grades? How did they determine who got in where?
Some high schools did require that you write an essay. There's this rigorous test called the SHSAT, which you have to take in order to get into the specialized high schools in New York City. I think there are like 9 of them. The high school that I went to, Townsend Harris, is one of those top tier high schools in New York City. So top tier that like we're like number, 10 or something on the national high schools list. So what Townsend did was it broke away from the specialized high schools at one point. And by the time I applied and got in, it was no longer a specialized high school. So Townsend Harris looked at things like your English scores, your math scores, your test scores, your GPA, your attendance record. Attendance was a big, big factor. I remember I wasn't absent a single day at all, and that probably was what got me into Townsend Harris, because attendance, you can't be absent at Townsend Harris pretty much. So it depends on where you went. The specialized high schools, you had to take that rigorous test, and they looked at your grades in addition to other things. It was crazy. It was barbaric. It made me cry. The process made me cry. The process made me want to die sometimes. It was horrible.
Did they do interviews like face to face?
Some of them did interviews. Yeah. I applied to, what was it, LaGuardia, Fiorello LaGuardia, which is a performing arts school, but at the time they were hell-bent on rigor and academic standards as well. So beyond the transcript, beyond the test scores, beyond the attendance, they also required that you audition. So you have to perform the song perfectly. And I remember I went there and I thought I was a good singer at the time, but then the other people who were auditioning with me, we were all in a row. There were like 20 of us in one room, and we all just took turns. It was horrible. They had operatic voices, and I obviously didn't get it. When the letter came from LaGuardia, I just didn't even open it because I didn't even bother. But yeah, those kinds of things existed. Auditions existed. In-person interviews existed. It was crazy and nightmarish for a 12-year-old to go through all that. But we went through it. New York City students, public school students went through it.
So in your high school, were there more girls?
Yes. In Townsend Harris High School, Townsend is famous for having way more girls than boys. 70% girls to boys, I think. 70% girls, 30% guys.
Yeah, right. I forgot to ask you what your pronouns are.
She, her.
And why not they, them?
I don't know. I'm thinking about that now, and maybe one day they will be they, them, but for now, she, her feels good to me. I like she, her. If you refer to me as they, I won't get mad. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think men can be feminists?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important for men to be feminists.
Yeah, and probably most of the men in your program say they're feminists, right?
I believe so. I haven't heard people like actually say that or I guess I have heard some people say they're feminists, but it's not something that I guess you just say casually in a conversation. More like how you present yourself, what you do, things like that, right?
Yeah, it's kind of assumed. What do you find in terms of dating scene? Do people go out in groups to, go to ice skating or roller skating or whatever? Do they use dating apps? Do they pair up? Do they hook up casually? What are you seeing among young people that their attitudes towards romance?
Dating apps are big. I have 2 dating apps, Tinder and Hinge. I got them I'm recently single, so for about 2 months or 3 months now, I've been single from a 4-year relationship with a male partner who's not straight, if that matters. But yeah, so during the last maybe 3 or 4 months of my relationship with my former partner, we were in an open relationship. So that's when I first got on the dating apps, and that was my first time ever being on those apps. For some reason, I've been lucky enough, I guess, to meet people in person, including my former partner. So it was just organic. You know, we worked together on the newspaper. I don't know, went to the same school, and something just like spurred. But in this case, with the open relationship, I couldn't really. It was harder to meet people organically. So the apps helped a lot with that. My friends are using the apps probably more than I am. People are definitely hooking up. I am hooking up. I'm totally fine with it. My friends are totally fine with it. People don't really go out in groups, I think. I've never been on a date in a group setting. I haven't even been well, I guess I've been on like a double date or two, but it's very rare. Like the idea is just kind of weird to me. And I don't really know anybody else who does that either. Do you know people who go out and date in groups?
Well, I think teenagers do. You know, they'll all meet at a coffee shop or at you know, the skating ramp or something. And they don't pair up. They meet in groups. I think teenagers do that a lot.
That's interesting. The only time that I've ever actually seen that occur is in movies and TV shows. In my life, I've never actually witnessed that, and I don't know. Maybe that's a New York thing. I don't know. For some reason, I have a feeling that New Yorkers date a little differently than the rest of the country, right? Because we're not. I don't know. Maybe that's like a suburban thing. Because when you're going out in groups, it's, I don't know, considered more safe or something. And parents, I feel, have a different definition of what safety means in suburbs than they do in the city. Because we are allowed to like go out on the subways since we're like 8 or 9 years old, right? Alone. And we go to, because we're applying to high schools and stuff, we're taking the subway sometimes from Queens to the Bronx, for example, or from the Bronx to Brooklyn, and it's a long commute, but we're doing it every day for high school, so maybe they have a different definition of safety. I've never witnessed group dates.
Got it. And do you think people's intent is to be monogamous and find one person, or is the intent, I'm in my 20s, I just want to experiment and have fun and meet different people? I mean, obviously it's different with different people, but is there like a trend?
I think it's a mix. I'm definitely seeing us as young people go away from monogamy. And I don't know if that's because of the circles that I tend to interact with, or the fact that I live in a metropolitan area, or what. A metropolitan liberal area, I should say. But I do see a lot of people pursuing polyamory. I do see people pursuing sexual encounters with more than one partner at the same time, for example. I see a lot of this. It's very prominent on the dating apps. It's very prominent in my own life. It's very prominent among my friends. There are a lot of friends, well, not a lot, but there are a substantial amount of friends that I have who are waiting for the one, or expecting to get married and be fulfilled for the rest of their lives. But there are also a lot of friends who have the opposite view, where they think more like me, and they're not sure if they want to get married, and I don't know, look at the divorce rates in the country. 50% of people end up getting divorced, so they're questioning whether it's worthwhile, or if one person can really be your everything, if that's a burden to put on somebody else, you know. So it's a mixed bag for me, for sure.
Are your parents still married?
My parents are still married. They've been married my mom had me when she was 25, and my mom is 50 now, so 25 years, which makes sense because I'm 24. Yes, they've been married all this time. Sometimes I feel like they shouldn't be, but, you know, my mom always says, I didn't get married to get divorced, so that's her mentality.
Mm-hmm. So you definitely have that role model of stability. Could you say about the kind of journalism that you've done, the kind of articles that you choose to write about, and can you choose, or the editor will call you up for Business Insider or CNBC and say, okay, I want you to research Gabby, or how much choice do you have?
A lot of choice. It depends on what's happening in the news cycle. Obviously, if there's breaking news, for example, going on, most reporters are going to pivot to that breaking news. Like during the Capitol riot, exactly a year ago, I was on that. I was doing reporting for that. It was a big story that pretty much every outlet in the world was covering at the same time. So that's what happens. It was a massive event. There was a lot of terror, a lot of uncertainty, so everybody pivoted to that. But with things that aren't breaking news, that with things that are outside of the realm of the current events news cycle, I have a lot of freedom over. So those are the ideas that I'm usually pitching to my editors. And that really aligns, those kinds of ideas align with my values, my interests as a person, and the kind of skill that I bring to the job. So I like to talk to people. I like to hear their stories. I like to ask a lot of questions. I like to feel things with them. Because when you're telling a story and you see their eyes light up because they're happy, or you see that they're getting kind of tense or nervous because they're telling you something sensitive or vulnerable. I'm fine experiencing that and being receptive to it. So the stories that I like to write the most involve things like power and secrecy and difficult conversations and vulnerabilities. So that in a journalistic, when you think about it journalistically, that means that I go after confidential documents like settlements. Settlements are big because, if you have a settlement, that means that somebody doesn't want you to know something, and that something is usually, workplace related, like harassment or assault or something. So I go after those documents. I go after NDAs, which do the same thing, but they're, before the incident occurred to prevent anything from happening in the public eye. I go after FOIAs, which government records that are meant to, be sort of obscured, but they're actually legally open to the public as long as you know what you're doing and you can actually secure them. So all of those secret documents, that's what I go after, and I use them to illuminate patterns of sexism, harassment, misogyny, discrimination, gender-based violence, all in my reporting.
And do you have access through your employers to sources other than what you have as just a private person? I mean, can you just do everything on your computer, or do they have sources that you can use that you don't have?
No, the reporter is usually responsible for coming up with our own sources. There are times when, for example, if we're talking through an idea with an editor, they'll be like, oh, I know blah, blah, blah. This person works here, so I can connect you with them. I'm sure they'd be willing to talk. So sure, we collaborate like that, but most of the time we're seeking out our own sources. We're really at the heart of the story, and the editor and the reporter are responsible for shaping the story, but the first product that goes to the editor is all the reporter and the reporter's work usually.
It seems like one of your most dramatic results was going after sexism at United Way, and what the CEO resigned. How did you get on that?
Yeah, that was a crazy story. My God. United Way, it's one of the country's largest nonprofits. I think it's like 5 or 6 in the country in terms of the revenue that they bring in. So it was a huge, huge story. I remember a source reached out to a colleague of mine at Business Insider, and the colleague, his name is Rob, and he had no expertise with this kind of topic at all. So he passed it on. He asked like the giant pool of reporters that we have if anybody would be interested in the story. Nobody really knew what United Way was. I had heard of it, so I jumped on the story, and it sounded like something that was totally in my wheelhouse. And I spoke to the source at the center of the story, who is named in the article, Lisa. She told me these horrible stories about what happened to her and her personal experience. So, I listened to her. I believed her, which, in journalism, you're supposed to be kind of skeptical and you're supposed to verify everything. But my go-to habit in journalism is just to believe whoever is talking to me about when they're talking about things like sexism and harassment and assault and all these gendered issues that usually get overlooked. So I empathized with her, I apologized to her, and she connected me with a few other sources, and then those sources connected me with other sources, so it kind of snowballed into this big, giant story where these 9 women were just telling me similar anecdotes, had similar experiences, and it just became too big to ignore. So
and the perpetrator was the CEO.
It's complicated. So the perpetrator, yes, at times it was the CEO who did it, but it was also the men who were below the CEO who were friends with the CEO, and they were all forming like this network of bros, and they were just kind of talking to each other about it, and they had women who were supporting them in their sexual behaviors and in all these inappropriate interactions with women. So it was top level leadership, and they perpetuated this culture of sexism harassment for 2 decades, and it was only just revealed in 2020.
Wow, that's a feather in your journalism cap.
It is. I'm very proud of it. He was fired. The way that the board put it, United Way board, they said that he was leaving for whatever reason, but it's suspicious.
To spend more time with his family.
Something like that, yeah. So it was suspicious that that's the reason that he was leaving was, a month after the story broke and the internal investigation went on at United Way. So it was just suspicious. So of course, I think I had a hand in making him step down.
Yeah, great. What about your story about Black women are more likely to be shot by police than other women? How did you get into that?
That is a product of the learning that I did for school. That Black women are a very underrepresented group of people. And there's like this saying where, I don't remember who came up with it. Was it like the Combahee River Collective who said something like, if you free the Black woman, then everyone is free, or something like that. That is a really popular saying in feminist studies, and I can't even remember who said it, unfortunately, but that's what really drove it, right? I'm thinking about Black women and how when Black men get shot, there's a lot of fanfare over it. Fanfare is not the right word, obviously, but fanfare in terms of like news coverage, in terms of questions asked, in terms of investigations conducted. But when Black women are shot and killed, there's not as much fanfare.
Wow.
So, I'm sorry, what?
I said, wow. I'm thinking about that. Is it because they're not killed as dramatically, like a knee to their neck? Or do you think it's just because they're Black women?
I think it's because they're Black women, yeah. I don't really think that people pay as much attention to women as they do to men, and when you're a Black woman, you get significantly less attention than other groups of people, especially, white men, but even Black men have an edge over Black women, I think. So that's what really drove this project. That project was painstaking. It took, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months to get done, and we had to file so many FOIA requests. We had to battle with so many different departments to get those requests, and they tried to stall us. They tried to, send us incomplete records. It was ridiculous.
Interesting. And then did you do it nationally, or did you stick to New York?
No, it was a national project. So it documents 50 Black women killed since 2015 on a national level. So in that project, we name the woman. We talk about the circumstances under which she was killed. We identify the officer who killed her, and we also identify the outcome of the officer. So in most cases, the officers faced no repercussions at all, which was crazy. None of the officers have been convicted, so that says something, I think. There were very few officers who were fired, very few officers who faced some kind of repercussions. There were maybe, I don't remember the exact total, but there were, I think, 100 officers or so responsible for the killings of those 50 Black women. So the goal of the project was to identify them, to identify their outcome, and quantify how few of them suffered punishments.
And what did you find in comparison to punishment for officers who shot Black men?
I actually didn't look at that. But I think that could be a really interesting project to do going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other stories that you've written that stand out as being wow stories?
Yeah. I think a lot about the Texas abortion story that I did on trans people. Because when you're talking about abortion, I don't know, there's like this thing in feminism where I feel like there's a divide on the way that we talk about abortion and reproductive rights. We either categorize it as a woman's issue or a bodily autonomy issue, right? But if you categorize it as a woman's issue, does that exclude people who are trans who are men who do have uteruses and need reproductive care that's usually tailored to women? Are we excluding them? So I feel like there's a discussion to be had about that. So the article that I wrote talks about how the Texas abortion law makes it difficult for trans people to acquire reproductive care that they need. Trans people with uteruses to acquire the reproductive care that they need. And nobody is talking about that because the conversation is centered around cis women who, I don't know, for some reason it's centered around cis women, and it goes into the debate about whether it is a women's issue or whether it is a bodily autonomy issue. LGBT groups do call it a bodily autonomy issue a lot of times. Some feminist groups call it a women's issue. It depends on what circle you're in, I guess.
Isn't it both?
It definitely is both. For sure, it's both. But when you characterize it as one thing, as just a women's issue, you are excluding a significant number of people, a big group of people, and you're sidelining a portion of the population. And it's not fair to those people because they are already marginalized, and it's not going to get much better for them if we keep doing this, if we keep calling it a women's issue and centering cis women, even if we're not intentionally centering them.
That seems to be a surprisingly large debate in feminism today. If trans women count as women in feminist groups, J.K. Rowling's kind of in the middle of all that. What's your feeling about that? Are you trans positive, I guess you would call it?
Yeah, trans women are women, trans men are men. There's not much else to be said about that. It's kind of sad about JK. It hurts me, and I'm sure that a lot of Harry Potter fans feel this way because Harry Potter was, a big influencer in a lot of our childhoods.
Yeah.
At the beginning of this conversation, I remember citing Hermione Granger as one of my influences. So I have a Harry Potter tattoo. It's right here on the back of my shoulder blade.
And what does it say?
I can't even show it to you because this is not going to come down, but it's a Gryffindor lion, and it's just a lion with its paws up like this, and it has the Gryffindor scarf around its neck. So I have that. It's very sad that J.K. Rowling has been adamant about her perspective for, 2 or 3 years now. She doesn't seem to be letting up anytime soon, despite the massive public backlash that she's had against her. So even the actors who starred in her own movies are turning against her, and it's kind of crazy to see that happening, but she's not letting up.
Mm-hmm. What do you see other issues that are contentious among feminists? I mean, it's surprising to me that that's such a big issue because there aren't that many trans women out there. I would think some issue that was more central to more people would be discussed, but I don't know. Do you hear any other debates?
I guess for some reason I hear debates about the pay gap, about whether it exists or not, even though I feel like there is ample evidence that it does in fact exist and that it's striated across the board for women of color, for white women, for men. It ranges, and there's clear evidence. But I hear a lot of debates about that.
What some feminists say there's not a pay gap?
Not some feminists, I would say. But there are high-profile figures who are on Twitter, and there are women who are arguing these things. And I don't know if I would call them feminists. I don't think they would identify as feminists, but I've seen debate about it in high-profile settings on social media. One of my friends, I'm not even sure if we're friends at this point, we'll see. But one of my friends is questioning whether the pay gap is legitimate, and I don't know. I don't really know where this is coming from. This is the first time that I've heard it.
I think what they're seeing is that when women and men graduate from university, their salaries are fairly even. But what really sets women back is being a mother. So there's definitely being a mother. Men excel, women fall behind. That's one of the biggest factor in the pay gap. So they're probably referring to the fact that right after college it's pretty even, or sometimes women are ahead, but not if they choose to be mothers.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? And I also feel like marriage has something to do with it too, because I feel like men get celebrated for marriage while women don't. Women get punished for being involved in a marriage, and they get questioned over their ability to commit to the work. So maybe that has something to do with it too, right?
So where do you see yourself 10 years from now?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to stay in journalism. I'm in journalism now, and I believe very deeply in its power to impact and change the world. But like I said, I'm also very keenly aware of its shortcomings and how difficult it is to make a huge impact compared to decades ago, for example, when trust in the media was high. And I think a lot about potentially going behind the scenes of journalism and trying to implement new ways to cover communities, trying to devise concrete ways to build trust in the media again. But at the same time, I really love reporting. I love meeting people. I love writing about them. So it'd be a difficult decision to leave the reporting side of it.
What about
I also love
teaching?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think I want to teach or maybe conduct research, and especially when it comes to opening the door to conversations around gender in media, like gender language. I don't know, maybe continuing to have discussions into how the language that news outlets use and disseminate very publicly to millions of people all the time contributes to and shapes our perceptions, maybe even contributes to this hold that heteronormativity has, this hold that sexism has. Those are important conversations. So I think about those a lot.
It would be interesting to see if the Gina Davis Institute hires people, researchers, because they're doing exactly what you are interested in.
Yeah, it would be. I'd love to. For the past year or so, I've been guest lecturing throughout the City University of New York, which is a privilege because I'm relatively young. I'm 24. I'm super young. But I've already had the chance to do this high impact reporting, this high impact, these high impact, sorry, that's the noise from the outside. I don't know what that is, but I live in New York, so it's normal for me.
No, I know, I figured.
So yeah, when I guest lecture, I'm talking about things like ethics in the classrooms, imposter syndrome, trauma that comes from reporting. I'm talking about these complex questions about what it means to be a journalist, what it means to shape our coverage, how all of these things. So I really like doing that, and I'm considering going into teaching at the college level. So maybe that's
a PhD.
Yeah, PhD seems kind of inaccessible to me, in all honesty, but I am thinking about it. I just don't know how to make it work because I'm not willing to give up my full-time job.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about that. I got a master's while I was teaching full-time. So I just did it. Well, I didn't even do it that slowly. But because I was teaching, then I could go to summer school and take a lot of classes. And then I took classes at night. So, you can do it.
Well, that's what I'm doing now with my master's program, but it seems like the expectation for a PhD student is that you devote your full-time career to it, and your PhD and your academic career becomes your essential job, right? So I don't know if I'm willing to do that.
Right.
I've had a discussion with the director of the Women's and Gender Studies program at the Graduate Center about this, and I don't know, it's just, to me, one of the reasons I love CUNY is because, like I said, because of its mission to make sure that education is as accessible to everyone as possible, higher education. So that's the reason I went to CUNY. But then when you look at PhD programs at CUNY, they're still mostly during the day. So unless you take a job during the night or you find some way to, support yourself on the $20,000 or so you get as a research assistant when you're a PhD student, then you can't really succeed at a PhD program, can you? And CUNY, I told the director that it's kind of antithetical to CUNY's mission that we are not offering better solutions for people who are full-time, professional, in whatever capacity, working to pay their bills, right? Because that's what CUNY is. It's full of commuter students. It's full of people who have to work in order to, make a living wage, have to pay their bills, have families. It's just, so I don't know. Nothing's happening from that as far as I know, but.
Got it. Would you consider motherhood, or is that definitely something you're not interested in?
No, I don't want kids at all.
You have your cat.
I have my cat. I have my hamster. Oh, my cat's actually here now.
Let's see your cat.
Sorry?
Let's see your cat.
So he's right here. Do you see him?
Oh, he's a good boy.
Baby. Yeah, he is. He's a good boy. His name is Morka, which means purring machine in Russian.
Ah. How does he ever go outside, or you can't let him outside?
No, he's a house cat. I live in an apartment, so he sometimes goes out into the hallway and he explores a little bit. We're not legally supposed to do that though. But it's okay. He doesn't go outside.
Yeah, he's used to it. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like people to know about young feminist activism, issues, approaches, whatever?
Well, yes. I don't know. This is something that I'm thinking about. It's called women's studies, right? Which is kind of weird. Just tailoring off of the discussion from the abortion conversation that we were having. To say that it's women's studies is gendered. It's not incredibly inclusive of what it means today to be involved in this field. So I don't know. I'm thinking about that. I think that I remember having discussions with some of my classmates about this, about the potential of changing the course name of the program name. Either at CUNY or just all over, just calling it something else, either gender studies or something different, right? Because I don't know. It just sounds kind of weird to me that it's called women's studies. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Who do you think it excludes?
Well, when you say women's studies, we're still thinking about gender, and we're thinking about masculinity as well. So it does include men, but men are not the concern here. I'm thinking about trans people who don't feel represented by the label woman, right? I'm thinking about people who are women, but don't feel like they're women in the sense that the word represents, right? So I don't know. I'm thinking that it can be exclusive, and I think that if we were to expand it and call it something like gender studies, maybe that would be gender and sexuality studies. Maybe that would be more representative of what we're trying to achieve, right?
It's true that women's studies, men's studies, masculinity study implies a binary, and people are getting away from binaries. Yeah, got it. Anything else that we've left out?
No.